Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel for the next instalment of this year's mystery week that I'm doing for Halloween, as I do every year. And seeing as today is the last Saturday of the month, I've got a serial killer story to share with you. Now, I live in a place called Reading, which is a town, and the biggest town in the UK, in the south of England, just about half an hour to 40 minutes outside of London. It's a pretty boring place. There's not many big names I can claim as being from Reading. I mean, there's Natalie Dormer, Ricky Gervais, Jeremy Kyle, Kate Winslet, but it's not exactly somewhere that breeds the big names like other places in the UK. But sadly, Reading can claim Amelia Dyer, one of the most prolific murderers in British history that you've probably never heard of. She was known as the Reading baby farmer. Amelia Dyer was born Amelia Hobley in a small village now known as Pyle Marsh, just outside of Bristol, in 1838. She was the youngest of 5 children. You could be forgiven for assuming that as she was born in Victorian England, she had a poor and difficult childhood, as was the case for most. But that's not entirely the case. Amelia learned to read and write from a young age, and she had a love of literature. She was a pretty privileged child for the time. But her mother actually became seriously ill with typhus, which affected her mother's mental health, and therefore her treatment of Amelia. Amelia was left to care for her mother, and she would receive regular beatings in payment. She was often the subject of her mother's violent rages until she eventually died when Amelia was 10 years old. At that point, Amelia was sent to live with an aunt in Bristol. Eventually, Amelia begins to work as a corset maker's apprentice, and she becomes estranged from her family, marrying a man called George Thomas. Now, he was 59 years old and she was just 24. On the marriage certificate, they both lie about their ages to close that gap. From there, she decides to train as a nurse. Now, being a nurse in Victorian England was not an easy feat. I mean, it's not an easy feat today, but in the 1800s it tended to be a lot more death and despair than healing. But it was a respectable job to have, and it seems like Amelia at this point was on a solid path to a good life. She was a respectable woman training as a nurse. But then she meets a midwife called Ellen Danes, and she learns of a different way to make a living. A lot less hard work than being a nurse, and a lot more profitable. Ellen Danes made her living as a baby farmer. A bit of history for you. So in 1834, the Poor Law Amendment Act had come into place, which removed any financial obligation for the fathers of illegitimate children. Illegitimate children, children born out of wedlock, were hugely stigmatised in these times in Victorian England. It was seen as shameful, and this new law was designed to restore female morality and stimulate thrift and industrious workers. Maybe the fathers didn't have to pay for these children, the mothers would stop having them because it was all the mother's fault. This law literally saw illegitimate children as a moral issue. It was a moral flaw for the mothers to be having these children out of wedlock. They shouldn't be having sex if they weren't married. Of course, that was just the mother's fault though, not the father's. And this same law also saw poverty as a moral issue as well. Yes, it was immoral to live in poverty in the 1800s. As a direct result of this law, unmarried mothers were even more socially and economically victimised than they were before, and this left many of them completely unable to provide for their children. And so, baby farming was born, which was the practice of accepting custody of an infant or a child in exchange for payment. And it would then be the job of the baby farmer to place the child in an adopted home. They basically acted as the middleman between this mother that couldn't afford their child and the adoptive parents. Or that was supposed to be the idea of it, of course. Sometimes the baby farmers were only there to care for the babies for a short amount of time, acting as a wet nurse of sorts. And some baby farmers would fully adopt the children themselves in exchange for a lump sum payment. The mother would hand over their baby with a lump sum of money that would pay for the care of the baby and complete discretion. But what a lot of baby farmers came to realise is that this lump sum payment wouldn't pay for the child in their care for very long. It was a lot more financially viable just to kill the child and move on to the next. A lot of mothers felt that they had no choice than to contact baby farmers in this time, who advertised their services through the newspapers. Most baby farmers purported to be one half of a respectable married couple looking to adopt or foster a young child. I'm sure that there were some mothers who were fully aware of what they were doing when they sent their children to the farmers, but I'm also sure that just as many would have been entirely naive about the entire situation, thinking that they were just doing the best thing for their child by getting them adopted out, hoping that they'd get adopted by a rich, privileged couple. Sometimes the baby farmers would take in these young pregnant women and care for them up until they gave birth, at which point they would part with their baby, the baby and the mother would go their separate ways. But sadly for a lot of baby farmers, murder was just easier and more profitable than actually caring for the baby. In these times, babies and children died often from illness, malnutrition or neglect. People finding the body of a baby in the streets attracted very little attention, and there was no way that these babies, these random bodies, could be traced back to anyone. And if the mothers later changed their mind and decided they wanted to check up on their babies, well, they couldn't really. The baby farmer would just make up an excuse as to where the child was, where it had been adopted out to, and even if the mother was suspicious, it's not like she was gonna go to the police about it. It wasn't until the late 19th/early 20th century that laws were brought into place to give local authorities more power over baby farming. Even if these mothers knew that something bad had happened to their child, or they had like an inkling that something bad had happened to their child, they couldn't go to the authorities because it was frowned upon. It would make them a outcast in society if they admitted that they had this illegitimate child. And also, what were the police really going to do about it? The baby farmers couldn't prove where the kid had gone. They couldn't prove that the baby farmers had harmed the kids. So what can they do? So when Amelia leaves nursing to give birth to her daughter Ellen and her elderly husband George dies in 1869, Amelia needs an income fast. She starts to advertise her services as a baby farmer through the newspapers of the day. Her advertisement read, "Married couple with no family would adopt healthy child. Nice country home. Terms £10. £10 was equivalent to about £1,000 today. Amelia would take in pregnant women, she would nurse babies and adopt babies in return for a substantial one-off payment and clothing for the child. She would meet with her potential clients and assure them that she was a respectable woman, she was married and intended to provide a safe and loving home for the child. Her career as a baby farmer in the end spanned 30 years. And at the beginning, it seems like Amelia did have good intentions with this. But she soon realised something that a lot of the baby farmers realise, that's a lot more profitable just to kill the children and pocket the money. In the early days of murdering these children, or literal babies, she would overdose the babies on a cordial known as Mother's Friend, which was a syrup that contained opium that was often given to noisy babies to sedate them. It was a common trick used by farmers and mothers in general. She would purposely overdose the babies, but then she'd call the coroner when they died, feigning shock and grief, and the coroner would often put the death down to malnutrition or something similar. This was a common death for babies at the time, malnutrition, and nobody suspected a thing. In 1872, Amelia marries a man called William Dyer and gives birth to 2 more children, Polly and William. Her and her family would move around constantly, advertising her services in different towns across the country, from Liverpool all the way down to Plymouth. She would charge between £10 and £80, which is £1,000 to £8,000 for her services. Most of the babies in her care would mysteriously die within days, if not hours. Her business was thriving and she was smart with how much she moved around. She never stayed in one place long enough to attract attention before swiftly moving on to the next. Nobody really paid any attention about what Amelia was doing until 1879, when a doctor becomes suspicious about the number of deaths coming from Amelia's home. And this doctor begins to wonder if they were all accidental. He reports her to the authorities, but instead of convicting her of murder or even manslaughter, she's simply sentenced to 6 months in a labour camp for neglect. Imagine that, she's literally got like tens if not hundreds of babies dying in her care constantly, and the authorities look at her and think, nah, she's not murdering them, it's just neglect. Upon release from this labour camp, it seems that she actually tries to change her ways for a short amount of time. She attempts to resume her nursing career. But she also spends spells in mental hospitals around this time, claiming that her time in the labour camps had destroyed her mental health. Her apparent poor mental health could also be linked to her own substance abuse. As well as using opium on the babies to kill them, she also likely used it herself. But it's actually more likely that she just used the asylums as a way to disappear when it was convenient for her. As a former asylum nurse, she knew the tricks of the trade, and she knew that the asylums would be a great place to lay low for a time when she needed to. You'd think that being caught would stop most people, but not Amelia. She tries to change for a bit, but quickly reverts back to her old ways. By 1890, she's returned to baby farming, and she decides to simply change her MO instead. On her release from camp, she lives in Cardiff for a short time before moving to Reading in 1895, along with her daughter Polly and Polly's husband Arthur. Once in Reading, she decides that it's a little bit stupid of her to be involving doctors in what she was doing. She realised that she didn't need the doctors to issue death certificates at all. She just needed to be able to dispose of the bodies herself, and nobody would be any the wiser about what she was doing. It's not like the authorities were like keeping a track on her baby farming. So from then on, what she would do is she'd just wrap the bodies of the babies in cloth and bury them around Reading, hiding them in different spots around town. Or she would just simply drop them in the River Thames. When she moved to Reading, Amelia was actually accompanied by a poor, unsuspecting associate called Jane Smith, who Amelia had recruited from the workhouse. Amelia would tell Jane to refer to her as mother in front of prospective clients, as she wanted to present a family image. In January 1986, 25-year-old Evelina Marmon gives birth to an illegitimate daughter in a boarding house in Cheltenham. Evelina didn't have the means to care for her daughter. She didn't even have anywhere to live. She lived in a boarding house. So she sought out adoption, hoping to go back to work and one day claim her daughter back. She comes across an advertisement in the newspaper for none other than Amelia Dyer, who is masquerading as a Mrs. Harding from Reading. Evelina contacts Mrs. Harding and she soon replies, saying, "I would be glad to have a dear little baby girl, one I could bring up and call my own. We are plain, homely people in fairly good circumstances. Myself and my husband are dearly fond of children. I have no children of my own. A child with me would have a good home and a mother's love." And as you can probably imagine, this was the kind of response that every mother was searching for when they had to adopt out their children. It's not that these mothers didn't want their children, they did, it's that they simply didn't have the means to care for them, and the government was doing everything they could to ensure that they were living on nothing. So a married, respectable and well-off woman who's unable to have children of her own seemed to be the perfect situation to adopt their child into. Evelina wanted to actually pay a weekly fee for the care of her daughter, no doubt hoping that eventually she could just stop paying and come back to claim her. But Amelia insisted on the one-off payment in advance, as she always did. Evelina reluctantly agrees to pay it, and Mrs. Harding / Amelia arrives in Cheltenham 1 week later to collect the child. The baby girl is called Doris, and Evelina hands Doris over along with the money and some clothes. A few days later, Evelina receives a letter saying that everything is well with Doris. Amelia would always send out a letter to the mothers a few days after collection. But, of course, all was not well. Doris had never arrived in Reading. Amelia had taken her straight to her daughter Polly's house, who had moved to London, and at Polly's house she'd strangled the baby with dressmaking tape, which was her usual method of murder at this point in her career. She'd moved on from the opium overdoses. Amelia and Polly wrap the baby in a napkin, and then once in Reading, Amelia drops the baby in a weighted package along with another named Harry Simmons into the River Thames. This was at a secluded spot near Caversham Lock. But she wasn't going to be able to continue with this for too much longer, because on the 30th of March 1986, a package was pulled out of the Thames in Reading by a bargeman. Inside the package was the body of a baby girl, who was later found to be a girl called Helena Fry. The package just hadn't been weighted down adequately and it had come up to the surface. It's obviously taken to the police, and amazingly, using the very limited technology available at the time, they're able to trace it back to Amelia. Inside the package was a label from Temple Meads railway station, and using microscopic analysis of the wrapping paper, he was able to find a barely legible name inside for Mrs. Thomas and an address. This address led them to Amelia Dyer's house. But they had no actual evidence to connect her to the crime. It was purely circumstantial. So they decided to place Amelia under surveillance. They know that if Amelia became suspicious, she would flee immediately, as she had done all across the country. So they actually send a young undercover woman to inquire about her services and arrange a meeting. I'm not 100% sure how this meeting confirmed to the police that Amelia Dyer was murdering babies. Info is a little bit sparse from over 100 years ago. But they found whatever it was they were looking for. Amelia opens the door expecting her new client to find police officers on her doorstep. She's arrested and charged with murder. Her son-in-law Arthur, who was in the house, is arrested as an accessory. Upon searching her house, they find multiple letters from clients that suggested there should be tens of babies in her house, but there were none. They drag the Thames and they discover the bodies of 6 more babies and interview multiple mothers and witnesses. All of the evidence suggested that she'd murdered many more than just 7 babies in total that they'd pulled from the Thames. The police calculated in the previous few months alone, at least 20 children had been placed in the care of a Mrs. Thomas or Mrs. Harding, which were Amelia's aliases at the time. Arthur is soon released when there's no evidence that he had acted as an accomplice, but there's always remained suspicion on both him and Polly. The police have always thought they knew what was going on and helped. And Polly is arrested herself and she's actually given a trial date. Arthur's actually released after a confession was written by Amelia Dyer, in which she states neither her daughter nor her son-in-law had anything to do with the killings. She wrote it whilst in Reading Prison, which, although it still stands today, is no longer a prison. And interestingly, it actually seems like Amelia may have been incarcerated there at the same time as Oscar Wilde, who was famously arrested and kept in Reading Prison for homosexuality. The confession letter is dated the 16th of April 1896 and reads, "To the Chief Superintendent of Police. Sir, will you kindly grant me the favour of presenting this to the magistrates on Saturday the 18th? I have made this statement out, for I may not have the opportunity then. I must relieve my mind, I do know, and I feel my days are numbered on this earth, but I do feel it is an awful thing drawing innocent people into trouble. I do know I shall have to answer before my Maker in heaven for the awful crimes I've committed, but as God Almighty is my judge in heaven and on earth, neither my daughter Mary Ann Polly Palmer nor her husband Alfred Ernest Palmer, I do most solemnly declare, neither of them had anything to do at all with it. They never knew I contemplated doing such a wicked thing until it was too late. I am speaking the truth and nothing but the truth, and I hope to be forgiven. I myself and I alone must stand before my Maker in heaven to give an answer for it all. Witness my hand, Amelia Dyer." Then also wrote to her poor dear Arthur to tell him of her confession. On the 22nd of May 1896, she appears at the Old Bailey and pleads guilty to just the one murder she was charged with, that of Doris Marmon. Her friends and family, including her own daughter, testified that they had been suspicious of her activities. There was also evidence from a man who had seen Amelia when she'd been disposing of the bodies at Caversham Lock. The only defence Amelia had was insanity, a history with asylums backing this up. But the prosecution argued, of course, that she'd only ever had herself committed to the asylums to avoid suspicion. The jury deliberated for just 4.5 minutes before finding Amelia Dyer guilty of the murder of Doris, and she was hung at Newgate Prison on Wednesday the 10th of June 1896 at 9 AM. Her last words were, "I have nothing to say." Just the night before she was executed, she actually found out that the allegations against Polly, her daughter, had been dropped. But just 2 years after Amelia's death, a 3-week-old baby was found just alive in a parcel in a train carriage in Devon. They traced the baby back to a widow, Jane Hill, who said that she'd given the baby to a Mrs. Stewart to adopt for £12 in Plymouth. It has been widely claimed, although never confirmed, that this Mrs. Stewart was actually Polly, Amelia's daughter, continuing on with her mother's crimes. It's not known exactly how many babies Amelia Dyer murdered. Strong estimations place the number over 400, making her one of the worst murderers in British history. Although only 3 of the victims were ever actually identified and attributed to her: Doris, Helena and Harry. For context, Harold Shipman is thought to have murdered up to 250 people. It was immediately following Dyer's case that Parliament really began to pay attention to the issues surrounding baby farming, and the Infant Life Protection Act of 1897 and the Children's Act of 1908 were passed. These new laws tightened the strings on adopting and fostering children, effectively ending baby farming once and for all. And that is the story of Amelia Dyer, one of the most prolific murderers of all time, and I'm sure she's one that very few of you have actually heard of. I'm only aware of her because she's from where I'm from. Make sure you tune in every day up until Halloween at 4:30 p.m. for a new mystery or history video on my channel. Other than that, I upload at 4:30 p.m. every single Wednesday, and I do these serial killer spotlight videos on the last Saturday of every single month, so make sure you subscribe to my channel if you like this kind of content. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye guys.